From day one, they've actually not supported the Speaker, and I find that unfortunate. I won't ask the reasons as to why, but yeah, and the member says he'll tell me why.
Did he just insinuate what I think he did?
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Conservative Deputy Speaker Chris D'Entremont has ruled on whether he accepts the recent question of privilege against Speaker Greg Fergus. This is a summary of what happened today, and we will tell you what happens next.
Let's take a look.
Ready to rule on the question of privilege raised on Monday, May 21st, 2024 by the member for Grande Prairie Mackenzie concerning the Speaker's alleged lack of impartiality. In his intervention, the member stated that the Liberal Party's promotional material used to advertise the Speaker's participation in an upcoming constituency event contained inflammatory partisan language targeting the Leader of the official opposition. Members, no doubt, regularly disagree with the decisions rendered in the House, and I could not allow every decision to rise to a question of privilege or point of order. However, outside activities that result in complaints are far less common and should therefore be dealt with in an extraordinary manner. Clearly, it is in the interest of the whole House to resolve this particular matter quickly and with all due seriousness. And as a result, I find that a prima facie question of privilege exists in this case. I now invite the member for Grande Prairie Mackenzie to move his motion.
Okay, so that's pretty significant. And the reason why it's significant is because what Chris D'Entremont has ruled is that he essentially is taking the member at his word, taking the Conservative member at his word, that this is indeed a question of privilege. So taking him at his word means you believe him. And you believe him that, for his reasoning, that this actually occurred. So as a result of that, the Conservatives, or the specific member, is now permitted to move a motion. And what might that motion be? It's to ask for the House to vote on whether or not they still have confidence in Greg Fergus. That's what this motion is going to be about, and that's what the debate today is going to entail.
This motion is important because it's imperative that we have a non-biased speaker in the House. If you have a speaker who is showing bias towards or against any particular party or any particular MP within the House, it's not fair to the constituents of that riding or of those ridings. So almost half of Canada voted for a Conservative MP. And if the speaker is showing bias towards those members of Parliament, then the constituents of those MPs are going to be misrepresented or underrepresented in Parliament.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the member for Megantic-Larab, that the Speaker's ongoing and repetitive partisan conduct outside of the chamber is a betrayal of the traditions and the expectations of his office and a breach of trust required to discharge his duties and responsibilities, all of which this House judges to be a serious contempt and therefore declares that the office of Speaker shall be vacated effective immediately before the hour of meeting on the next Monday the House sits following the day this resolution is adopted, and directs that the election of Speaker pursuant to Standing Order 2.2 shall be the first order of business at that Monday's sitting of the House.
Okay, so what does that motion do? That motion essentially says, if it's successful, then Speaker Fergus, you are fired. That's what that means.
He'll still remain an MP, but he won't be Speaker of the House anymore.
Right. He'll most likely, retreat into obscurity, into the backbenching section of the Liberal Party, and a new Speaker shall be elected. And I think at that point, I don't think there's going to be any choice but to put Chris D'Entremont forward, because he's been the one that has had to carry the House when all of these, questions of privilege and all of these points of order have required Fergus to recuse himself.
Well, and not just that, but we have it on good authority that D'Entremont was the pick for Speaker, but the Liberals came out with Fergus and said, oh, you know, vote for this Speaker, trust us, he can do a really good job.
Yeah. Rule number 1, never trust this Liberal government.
Debate. The honourable member for Grand Prairie Mackenzie.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I regret to stand yet again to declare that the Speaker is a partisan Liberal. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't stand here to say that as a critique or a criticism. Well, I might do that in a different setting. Today, I bring that up to say that those are the facts. The fact is that the Speaker has a very, very, very long history of partisan Liberal political activity. As a young person, the Speaker was the president of Young Liberals. He took an activist role in that position, building Liberal organizations and connecting with Liberals from coast to coast. I, too, was involved in young conservative politics, and so I know a little bit about what's involved there. I can tell you that nobody gets involved in youth politics because they are a nonpartisan. It is a very partisan environment. He went on to be a staff member for several Liberal cabinet ministers, and as a matter of fact, he was so well known within Liberal politics that Stéphane Dion appointed him to be the national director of the Liberal Party. Now, he went on after being elected, he took on what is to be probably the most partisan positions in the House of Commons, which is becoming the pit bull to defend the Prime Minister as the Prime Minister's parliamentary secretary. I say all of that simply to give a context to why there was many in this House that were concerned or had reservations about electing the member to become the Speaker of the House of Commons. It was evident that the person who is now, the member who is now the Speaker, had a very, very partisan history, and he did it very, very well. As a matter of fact, oftentimes he would disrupt committees and agitate processes and procedures to try to defend the Prime Minister, especially when the Prime Minister was coming under the scrutiny of the litany of scandals that he has now found himself in.
Chris Warkentin spoke for about 20 minutes. When you're discussing motions, you're allowed 20 minutes as a speaker to actually state your case and make your argument. And then what happens is there's a certain allotment of time. I believe it's 5 minutes for questions and answers. And then at the end of that time, then it moves on to the next speaker that's on the docket to speak about the motion, and then they get to speak for 20 minutes. So this can go on for some time, but for good reason, because they want to make sure that these types of issues are completely fleshed out and examined from all sides. And you get that where, you know, all the parties get to stand up and present an argument, and all of the different parties get to raise questions on that argument that each of these speakers make. So in Chris Warkentin's main argument here that he extends over 20 minutes, he is going through all of the history of Speaker Fergus to bring that to bear on why this is a problem. Because it's not like this was just a one-off thing. The Conservatives wouldn't be raising this if this was just a one-off. They're raising this because this is now the fourth time that there's been an outside problem with this speaker and partisanship. Now, the issue is before that, they had said, we have concerns on having this MP as a speaker because he was engaged in the most partisan roles in the party. And as Fox has said before, almost every other speaker goes through training, and they get that training by performing different roles. And they're not the super partisan roles in the party. They're the less partisan roles in the party. And then when they're in government, they perform roles like become deputy speaker, like they are vice chair or chair on committees where you're expected to be nonpartisan.
Yeah, you don't typically go from parliamentary secretary all the way to speaker with nothing in between.
Right? It's actually quite ridiculous that the parliamentary secretary to the prime minister immediately goes into the speaker's role as nonpartisan.
Well, because Fergus didn't receive that training either as chair or deputy speaker or assistant deputy speaker, what have you, the Liberals essentially set him up for failure. And unfortunately, that's exactly what's happening right now.
You know, it's interesting in regards to hearing the Conservatives, not once, not twice, but not even 3 times. They have constantly, Madam Speaker, had it in for this Speaker. They really have. You know, I wasn't here on the day of the election of the Speaker because I was in a provincial election working on my daughter's campaign at that point, so I couldn't be here. But in coming back, I heard comments in regards to the Conservatives' shock and surprise to the fact that the Speaker actually had won. From day one, they've actually not supported the Speaker, and I find that unfortunate. I won't ask the reasons as to why, but yeah, and the member says he'll tell me why.
Did he just insinuate what I think he did?
Yes, he just insinuated that the reason why the Conservatives didn't want Greg Fergus as Speaker was because he's black.
That's such an awful thing to say.
Yep.
It's because he was not trained for the role. If Fergus had expressed an interest in the speakership by being chair, by being vice chair, by being deputy speaker, by being assistant deputy speaker, and so on, then it would have come as less of a surprise, one would think. But to go from a hyper-partisan role as the Prime Minister's secretary all the way to a non-partisan role as speaker, it's quite puzzling.
Yeah, it's so frustrating because they are so desperate to just ignore the problems with this Speaker that they just resort to any mudslinging that they can. The Conservatives don't give a crap. The sex, the race, the sexuality, they don't care at all about those aspects in terms of the qualifications to be a speaker. Well, neither do the Bloc.
Look at their caucus. It's composed of many different people from all different walks of life.
Right, so they don't care. What they care about is, can you do the job? So why didn't they want Fergus to be in this position? Let's hear it.
But maybe he can expand on his heckle he just said. My question to the member is, do tell me why as he heckled.
Member for Grand Prairie, Mackenzie.
Madam Speaker, the majority of my speaking time was explaining why. The evidence that had mounted even before the Speaker had taken the Speaker's chair. It is not a crime for somebody to get elected who has a very robust partisan political history. There's many of us that do. The issue is that the Speaker has continued his aggressive partisan behavior throughout his time in this House of Commons, and everybody knows about it. I read testimony of where the Speaker, the now Speaker, said that even if a parliamentary committee passed a request for information, he would disregard it. Their government would disregard it. He didn't defend the interest of Parliament. He didn't defend the procedures and the policies of transparency that ensure that Canadians get the information that their elected officials request in this place. He said he would ensure that it never saw the light of day. And this is direct contrast to his predecessor, who I'm sure reluctantly sued his own party's government to get information that had been requested by this House. It was clearly evident that this Speaker would always put the Liberal Party ahead of Canadians and ahead of this Parliament every single time. And that's why we didn't vote for him.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Brentford.
Sounds like sound justification to me.
Well, because it's supposed to be country above party and party above self. And it seems like Fergus in particular didn't follow that line of thinking.
No, Fergus was, nobody above self and nothing above party. And he chooses to act in his own best interest whenever he likes, and then acts in his party's interest whenever he likes.
And then Canadians suffer as a result.
Now, this is the thing. We had our criticism of Anthony Rota. But I don't think at any point we thought that he should be ousted as speaker. I can't recall that anyway. And I give kudos to Chris Workington because he recalled when Anthony Rota actually sued the government to get the Winnipeg lab documents as it related to the Winnipeg lab scandal of the 2 Chinese scientists that were found to be stealing samples and stealing information and sending it back to the Wuhan lab. And committee ordered the production of documents from the government, and the government wouldn't give them up. So a motion was brought to the House, and Anthony Rota decided to sue the government to get it. And then all of a sudden an election was called. So the problem with Anthony Rota was that he was done dirty by Trudeau, and he was left holding the bag. It was the Prime Minister's office that actually invited the Nazi to Parliament. It wasn't Anthony Rota, despite it coming from Anthony Rota's writing. But here's the interesting thing. You know what? I'm going to pause. I'm going to get back to that later, but I'm coming back to this.
Brian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for that excellent speech and the grounds for which we seek the removal of the Speaker of the House. Can my colleague expand and provide some examples of the partisanship displayed by the Speaker of the House in terms of how he manages proceedings in the House itself?
Honourable Member for Grand Prairie Mackenzie.
Well, there's been many times, and of course, look, I've played a number of sports, and from time to time you get frustrated with the referee. Been there, done that. Sometimes when the call comes to your favor, you're happy, and when it doesn't, then of course you claim that they're favoring the other side. But this speaker, I believe, has done it consistently in this House, where he'll hear one thing on this side of the House and not hear it on the other side. And quite frankly, Madam Speaker, folks can, they can decide for themselves. But the national media was seized with an episode of the demonstration of what I believe I've just described, when the Prime Minister used language that was, some would consider inappropriate. The Speaker asked for him to withdraw it. The Prime Minister didn't. He changed it up a little bit and moved on. When the Leader of the Official Opposition, in the same question period, did almost exactly identically the same thing. As a matter of fact, stood several times to say that he would replace the word with an alternative word that had been used, which the Prime Minister had just done, where the Prime Minister had just replaced the word. The Leader of the Official Opposition requested several times to do the exact same thing. The Speaker had a different ruling for the Leader of the Official Opposition opposed to the Prime Minister. Clearly, a partisan interpretation. He was clearly partisan in his rulings that day, and the media all saw it.
So, of course, what he's talking about is Pierre Poilievre's wacko comment, right? And we did a video on that. I'm pretty sure all Canadians know exactly what happened there. Now, contrast that to Anthony Rota. We did see scenarios where people, MPs on the Conservative side, were given warnings for what they said. And on the Liberal side, they were not. I remember distinctly when I believe it was Chrystia Freeland called one of the Conservatives a partisan hack, and nothing happened. Subsequent to that, one of the Conservatives said something similar, and they were called out for it. Now, the difference is Rota never ejected anybody.
Well, I'm sure he did. But
No, not over that, right?
yeah, not that I recall anyways in my memory. All in all, I would say Rhoda was a pretty good speaker. I know that he made mistakes, of course. I mean, it's like professional sports, right? You're sitting there watching and a ref misses a call. But I think he tried to be fair. And it's unfortunate because the whole debacle with Hunka, really, not only did it result in Rhoda being removed as speaker, or he did the honorable thing actually and resigned as speaker. He's still currently an MP in the House, but he's also announced his retirement. And I feel like he's been thrown under the bus by Trudeau and the PMO, because it seems to me that when you have a good employee, someone who does their job well and takes pride in their work, and you're a corrupt entity, a corrupt company, a corrupt government, you can't have that person around because they're a liability. So either that person has to become corrupt, or in this case, you have to make it so that they leave.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is more of a comment than a question for my colleague. The current Speaker was elected barely 8 months ago, September 27th or 28th. The Bloc called for him to step down after the second incident, and now we're at the third incident. My question for my colleague is, if this motion doesn't pass, what should we expect? Currently, the term that we like in the Bloc is that the Speaker has become a distraction that Parliament could do without. The image of the Speaker is the highest concern for this House, so we are calling for the second time for him to step down.
So, although the Bloc is saying this is the third time, it's technically the fourth, but it's only the third time that this has actually been raised in the House because there was an incident, that happened outside that wasn't. But the Bloc has made their position quite clear. They're done. And just like they were done on the second occasion, they are in lockstep with the Conservatives on this. They don't have confidence in the Speaker. They're done.
Well, because the Bloc understands the gravity of having a Speaker that is biased, not just for them, not just for the MPs in the House, but for all Canadians.
100%.
It's amazing how the member from Winnipeg North is such a partisan that he defends a partisan speaker with such veracity. And I'll ask a similar question to the one that was just asked by my friend from the Bloc about this. We really have the real opposition. There's only two opposition parties because the third one is in a coalition with the government that last December basically expressed no confidence in the Speaker because of the partisan nature of what he did then with the video. He did it only a week later in Washington. The list grows. Apparently being a Liberal generally, as we know from the Prime Minister on who sets the standard, saying I'm sorry countless times makes up for all of your mistakes, whether you breach the Ethics Act or anything else, and there's no consequences. So what is the consequence to the Speaker consistently, at least once a month now it appears, making partisan statements, being part of partisan organizations, many of them himself, some on behalf of others. What is that number that says, is it 10? Is it 20 apologies? Is it 30 apologies before these Liberals recognize that the neutrality of the Speaker has been destroyed by the Speaker?
Secretary.
Madam Speaker, the Conservative caucus collectively needs to have a huddle on this. I don't think they actually have read any of the media stories. What took place is an incident, and the Liberal Party of Canada has taken full responsibility for that incident, has formally apologized to the Speaker, and through that to all Canadians. It was not the Speaker. So it's almost like saying we are going to punish little Johnny for stealing a chocolate bar when it wasn't Johnny that stole the chocolate bar.
You know what it's also almost like? And I'm coming back to it now. It's almost like the Prime Minister's office extends an invitation to some guy who turns out to be a Nazi, unbeknownst to the Speaker, and then the guy shows up, that he gets acknowledged by the Speaker, and then the Speaker finds out afterwards that this guy actually was a Nazi. And then he's thrown under the bus. Oh, wait, that happened.
It did. It did.
So where's your liberal logic there? Mr. Lamoureux?
Because Mr. Lamoureux doesn't seem to understand the difference between responsibility and accountability. And I'll use the example that I did in the last video where we talked about this. Suppose I bring my son into a china shop with me and I'm not watching him and he breaks something. He's the one that's responsible because he's the one that did the breaking. But I'm the one that's accountable because I wasn't watching him. And because I wasn't watching him, he was permitted to break something.
100%. And this is also reflected when Kevin Lamoureux again asks a member of the block a similar question as to, why is he responsible? This isn't right. This isn't right. So let's hear what happened.
Madam Speaker, that wasn't the question. The question is, we're talking about the incident that's before us today. That was the Liberal Party that took responsibility, and the Bloc seemed to be content at blaming the Speaker for what the Liberal Party of Canada had done and had formally apologized for. Why would you punish the Speaker for something in which the Liberal Party of Canada has taken the responsibility? That's the question.
Member for La Prairie. I get it. He's the one who doesn't understand my answer. So the Speaker of the House has to be very careful about his neutrality. That's part of his job. He has to jealously guard his neutrality because that's one of the pillars of the speakership. So he has to be vigilant. He needs to be extra careful with his events, with whatever he does. That's his job. He has to say to himself, I have to make sure no one ever suspects that I'm partisan. I have to be white as the driven snow. And the Liberal Party of Canada comes along and writes to people, criticizes the Conservative Party and in the billing of this event for the Speaker, and it takes the Speaker 6 days to realize that there's a problem. How is it that everyone else realized there was a problem and the Speaker didn't? When that's his job, it's part of his job to ensure nothing like that happens. So not only was this event not neutral, but it showed that the Speaker lacked judgment. And I like the Speaker. He's a nice guy, but he has to be competent. And what we're wondering is, what more is it going to take?
Mr. Therrien had a very good point there. It's not like this post was up on the Liberal website for just a couple hours. Their social media manager put it up and it was an oops and it was brought down. It was up for almost a week.
Right, and this goes back to a point that we raised in the initial video where, as an MP, messaging that's going out on your behalf is your responsibility, and you are accountable for it.
Well, and Monsieur Therrien also said that, the Speaker has to guard his neutrality, and that's the reason the Speaker gets paid 50% more than a regular MP. Fergus is making as much as the leader of the official opposition. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's like $300,000 a year.
It's because expectations are high.
Right. When you're in a job that you have to be on all the time like that, you're going to get paid more money.
And you're telling me that that what, the Liberal Party just decided that Speaker Fergus was going to be hosting an event all on their own, and so they decided to put this messaging up without telling him? No, sorry, that's not how it works. It's Fergus's office decided that there's going to be an event, and then Fergus's office would have worked with the Liberal Party of Canada to put the post up. Now, you're telling me that there wasn't an approval process to put that post up? I don't buy it.
Well, and again, if this was the first instance of Fergus's non-neutrality showing, I think everybody would be a little bit more forgiving because they would perhaps say maybe it was the social media manager, maybe it was the Liberal Party. Although he's accountable, he wasn't responsible. Let's give him a pass. But because this is the third or the fourth time something like this has happened, I think everybody's tired of it. Well,
and Kevin Lamoureux will have you, think, oh, forget about the rest of it. Forget about the pattern that is clearly here. We're just talking about this one scenario. No, you're not.
Right. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
Fool me 4 times, fire the Speaker.